The surgeon told my family I had maybe 2 days left to live. My son didn't even wait for him to finish the sentence before he started asking which lake cabin would be his. My daughter just checked the time on her phone, not out of worry, not out of grief. She wanted to know if she'd still make her dinner reservation. Then she turned to the doctor and asked how long these things usually take, like she was waiting on someone to finish remodeling her kitchen. They thought I couldn't hear a thing, but they were wrong, and that one mistake is the reason I'm sitting here telling you this story today. Instead of letting them tell a very different one at my funeral, a very different one at my funeral. Let me back up, because if I don't, none of this will land the way it should. My name is Gerald. Most people call me Jerry. I'm 62 years old, and I live in a town called Harlow Bend, up where the river goes slow and the winters come early. I spent 40 years building a chain of hardware and farm supply stores across 3 counties, 11 locations. Started with one cramped shop and a loan I had no business qualifying for. By the time my heart gave out on a Sunday afternoon, those stores employed almost 200 people. Everyone in town assumed I'd built something worth a fortune. They were right. They just didn't know who'd been quietly carving it up while I was still breathing. I had a wife once, Diane. We were married 34 years before cancer took her. Losing her hollowed me out in a way I never fully recovered from. After she was gone, I poured everything into the kids and the business, because those were the only 2 things left that felt like hers too. 3 kids. That's where this gets complicated. My oldest is Brett, 41. He carried the title of regional manager, which mostly meant he showed up late and left early, and signed his name to other people's work. My daughter Lauren is 36, lives 2 towns over, calls me when something breaks or a bill comes due. And then there's Marcus. Marcus isn't mine by blood. Diane raised him from a relationship before me, and his real father vanished before the boy could walk. I married Diane when Marcus was 5. I taught that kid to drive. I walked him through his first heartbreak. I made him chief operations officer of the whole company. I never once thought of him as anything other than my son. Remember that. It matters later. It was a Sunday in October when the floor fell out from under me. I'd been at the flagship store doing inventory, the way I did every Sunday, alone, because I liked the quiet. I felt a pressure in my chest like a truck parked on it. Then the world tilted. Then the concrete floor came up to meet my face. I don't remember the ambulance. What I remember is waking up inside my own body without being able to use it. They call it a locked-in state. The machines registered me as unresponsive. My eyes wouldn't open on command. My hands wouldn't move. But somewhere behind all that dead weight, I was awake, and I could hear every single word spoken in that room. The doctors thought I was gone. My family thought I was gone. And people say a lot of honest things in front of a man they've already decided is dead. That's when I learned who they really were. The first voice I picked out clearly was Brett's. He was standing close to the bed, and he wasn't whispering, because why would he? He told the doctor, flat as reading a grocery list, that I'd always said I never wanted to be kept alive by tubes and machines, that I'd hate this, that the family was prepared to let me go with dignity. I never said that. Not once in my entire life. I'm a stubborn old man who wanted every extra hour I could steal. But there was Brett, my firstborn, calmly inventing my last wishes so the wait would be shorter. I wanted to sit up and scream. I couldn't move a muscle, so I did the only thing I could do. I stayed still, and I listened, and I let them keep talking. That decision to lie there and absorb instead of react saved more of my life than any surgeon did. Because a man who pretends to be asleep finds out exactly who's been watching the door. Then Lauren spoke, and somehow it was worse. She didn't cry. She asked the doctor, in a careful, polite voice, roughly how long these things usually take, not whether I'd recover. How long until it's over, the way you'd ask a contractor when the kitchen will be finished. My little girl, the one who used to fall asleep against my shoulder during long drives, was standing 3 feet away asking for a timeline on her own father's death. I lay there and felt something inside me go very, very quiet. If you've ever had someone you love look right past you like you were already furniture, like you'd stopped being a person and turned into a problem to be scheduled, then you know the exact feeling that filled that hospital room. It's not anger first. Anger comes later. First, it's just this cold, bottomless disbelief. Your mind keeps saying, no, surely not. Surely I misheard. You didn't mishear. You never do. And honestly, if that were me hearing it, I don't know that I could have stayed silent. I think most people couldn't. But something in me understood, in that moment, that my silence was the only card I had left. So I held it. Over the next 3 days, the room became a confession booth, where I was the only one who didn't know I was the priest. Brett took a phone call right beside my bed. He thought I was too far gone to count. He told whoever was on the line that the old man wouldn't last the week, that the liquidation could start soon, that he already had a buyer interested in the 3 Western stores. Liquidation. He was talking about dismantling 40 years of my life over the sound of my own heart monitor, and he didn't lower his voice once. I memorized that buyer's name. I'll come back to it. Lauren came by mostly to talk about the house. She wanted Diane's house, the house I built with my own hands, where my wife took her last breath, and she wanted to know if Brett would fight her for it. They negotiated my estate across my unconscious body, like 2 kids splitting a candy bar. Not one tear, not one moment of grief, just inventory. And then there was Marcus. I waited for Marcus to be different. I prayed for it, in whatever way a half-dead man prays. Because if anyone in that family owed me their loyalty, it was the boy I'd chosen, the boy with no obligation of blood who I'd loved anyway. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm and competent, the same voice he used in boardrooms. He told the others not to worry about the company side of things. He said he knew where every account was, every password, every signature. He said the transition would be clean if they just let him handle it. I know where everything is. 4 words. Something cold settled in my gut and stayed there. I didn't understand yet why those words frightened me. But the part of me that built a business from nothing, the part that knows when a number doesn't add up, was already awake and counting. On the 4th day, my eyes opened. A nurse was the only one in the room, and she dropped a chart and ran for the hall, shouting. There was chaos, light, the rush of people who'd already written me off scrambling to celebrate. The doctors ran their tests. What year is it? Who's the president? Squeeze my hand. I squeezed. I answered everything. The body that had betrayed me for 4 days slowly came back online. And when my children walked through that door an hour later, I watched their faces very, very closely. There was relief, I'll give them that. But underneath the relief, for just a flicker, there was something else. Something that looked an awful lot like disappointment, doing its best to hide. Brett hugged me too hard. Lauren cried, finally, though I couldn't have told you what the tears were actually for. Marcus shook my hand with both of his and said, "We were terrified, Dad. Absolutely terrified." I smiled at every one of them. I said I was the luckiest man alive to have a family like mine. Every word out of my mouth was a lie. And for the first time in my life, lying felt like the most honest thing I'd ever done. Here's the thing nobody tells you about coming back from the edge. The hardest part isn't the recovery. It's walking back into your own life and pretending you didn't hear what you heard. I went home to a house full of people performing love for a man they'd been ready to bury. Lauren stocked my fridge. Brett mowed my lawn, which he hadn't done since he was 16. Marcus told me to forget about work, that he had it all handled. "I'll bet you do, son. I'll bet you do." So I played my part. I told them I was still weak, still foggy, still getting headaches. I told them the doctor said I needed total rest and no stress, no business, no numbers. They believed it instantly, which told me everything about how little they'd actually been looking at me for years. A tired old man, grateful and confused, drinking the soup they brought him. I was none of those things. I was wide awake. And I had nothing now but time and a very long memory. The first call I made, the moment the house was empty, was not to my family lawyer. The man who'd handled my affairs for 20 years had been to dinner with Brett twice that month. I'd seen it on a credit card statement I wasn't supposed to see. No, I needed someone with no history in this town, and no loyalty to anyone but me. I found her through an old army friend. Her name was Patricia Vane, a forensic attorney out of the city who specialized in exactly one thing, finding money that someone had worked very hard to hide. I sat across from her and said, "I need you to assume my family has been robbing me, and I need you to prove it." She didn't blink. She just opened a notebook and said, "Then let's go find it." What she found over the next 3 weeks turned my stomach inside out. Marcus, my Marcus, the boy I'd chosen, had been bleeding the company for almost 4 years. He'd done it quietly, patiently, through fake vendor accounts and inflated invoices, routed to a shell company he'd registered 2 states away. The number Patricia put in front of me was just over $900,000. Nearly $1 million, siphoned a little at a time while I clapped him on the back and called him my finest hire. And his reason, this is the part that still sits in my chest, was fear. Patricia recovered messages where he'd written it out himself. He believed that because he wasn't my blood, the will would cut him out. He believed that when I died, Brett and Lauren would close ranks and leave him with nothing. So he decided to take his inheritance early, in secret, before anyone could deny it to him. I want you to sit with that, because it's the part most people get wrong about betrayal. Marcus didn't wake up one morning a villain. He convinced himself he was a victim first. He told himself a story where he was the one being wronged, where stealing was just taking what was already his. That's how good people do terrible things. They build a courtroom in their own head and acquit themselves before the crime. I understood his fear. I'd given him 40 years of reasons not to feel it. He stole from me anyway. Understanding why someone hurts you doesn't undo the hurt. It just makes it lonelier. And there was more. Of course there was more, Brett had known. Not the full scope, but enough. He'd caught a discrepancy 2 years back, and instead of telling me, he'd gone to Marcus and quietly demanded a cut to keep his mouth shut. My eldest son sold his silence for a monthly payment, routed through his wife's side business. Lauren wasn't part of the theft, but she'd been the one feeding Marcus my private financial documents, because Marcus had promised her the lake house in return. The whole thing was a web, and I'd been sleeping in the center of it for years. I didn't cry in Patricia's office. I want to be honest about that. I sat very still, and I felt a door somewhere inside me close, quietly, and completely. The man who walked out of that office was not the man who'd walked in. The father was gone. What was left was just the businessman who'd built it all in the first place, and that man does not lose. Now, if you've ever discovered that the people closest to you were running a quiet game against you the whole time, you know that the worst part isn't the money you can replace. It's the rewriting of your own memory. Every birthday, every Christmas, every I love you. Dad, you have to go back and ask which ones were real and which were performances. That's the theft that actually breaks you, not the dollars. The past. I spent a long night with that. Then I got to work. Here's what people misunderstand about a man like me. I'm not a vengeful person by nature. I spent my whole career in logistics and supply, in moving the right thing to the right place at the right time with as little waste as possible. So I didn't want a screaming match. I didn't want chaos. I wanted a clean, sequenced delivery of consequences, each one arriving exactly when it should. And it happened that my 63rd birthday was 3 weeks away. Lauren had already suggested, brightly, that we should throw a real party this year to celebrate me beating the odds. A house full of family and friends and neighbors. Everyone I knew, all in one room. I told her I thought that was a wonderful idea. While they planned the party, I worked. I quietly moved my personal accounts, the ones Marcus didn't have his hooks in, to a new bank, where no one had signing authority but me. Patricia prepared a lawsuit to freeze the shell company and claw back every stolen dollar, sitting finished in a drawer, ready to file. I had a new will drawn up. The old one was generous to all three of them. The new one was an education, and I tracked down the buyer Brett had lined up for my 3 Western stores. The deal he'd been arranging over my hospital bed. I called the man myself. Turned out he had no idea I was still alive. The conversation we had was very interesting, and it ended with him agreeing to be in town the night of my party. Every piece was sliding into place, and not one of them suspected a thing. As far as Marcus knew, the old man was home eating soup and watching the Weather Channel. He had 3 weeks left to enjoy a life he thought he'd already won. The party was on a Saturday evening, the first cold, clear night of the season. They held it at the house Diane's house with strings of lights across the back deck and the river running black and quiet beyond the lawn. Around 40 people came. Neighbors I'd known for decades. 2 of my pastors. Old friends, longtime employees, the whole town it felt like. Lauren had hung a banner that said, "Celebrating 63 years, Jerry." I stood under it for a long moment before anyone arrived and just looked at it. 63 years. Sure, let's celebrate that. Brett showed up first, dressed like he was hosting, clapping shoulders, the king of a kingdom he assumed he'd inherit. Lauren arrived with a card, and that careful smile she'd worn in the hospital. And Marcus, as always, came last, because arriving last made him feel important. He shook my hand with both of his, the way he did when he was performing warmth instead of feeling it, and he said, 63, Dad. You've still got so much road ahead of you. You have no idea, I told him. I've got a little something for everyone tonight. He smiled and asked what kind of something. The life-changing kind, I said. He laughed. He thought it was a joke. Now let me slow this down, because this is the part I've replayed 1,000 times since, and I want you to be standing in that backyard with me. By 8 o'clock the deck was full, glasses clinking, people laughing in that easy way they do before anything's gone wrong. Out front, parked along the curb where no one would notice, was Patricia Vane in her sedan with a folder on the passenger seat. 2 towns over, a sheriff's deputy I'd spoken to that afternoon was sitting in an unmarked car, waiting for one phone call. The buyer Brett had tried to sell my stores to was standing near the drinks table, a stranger to everyone there but me. Everything was in position. I walked to the center of the deck. I picked up a fork. I tapped it against my glass, and the yard went slowly, beautifully quiet. I want you to picture their faces. Lauren, glowing, certain this was her moment to be thanked. Brett, raising his glass before I'd even spoken, ready to bask. And Marcus, arms loosely crossed, watching me with that easy confidence of a man who believes he holds every card in the deck. I let the silence sit a second longer than was comfortable. Then I began. I thanked them all for coming. I said that lying in that hospital, certain I was at the end, had a way of clarifying a man's thinking. I said you find out, in a moment like that, exactly what your life has been made of. And I watched Lauren's smile freeze, just slightly, as some animal part of her sensed the temperature in the yard begin to drop. She felt it before she understood it. I said that I'd heard things in that hospital room, things spoken by people who believed I was already gone. And tonight, surrounded by everyone who'd watched me build this life, I wanted to share what I'd learned. I reached down to the table beside me. There were 3 envelopes there, each with a name on the front in my own handwriting. The yard had gone completely silent now. Even the people who had no idea what was happening could feel that something enormous was about to. I picked up the first one. Brett. My son stepped forward with the loose smile of a man expecting a check. He opened the envelope. I watched the smile drain out of his face like water leaving a tub, slow and total. Inside was a transcript, every word he'd spoken in that hospital room, about liquidation, about buyers, about dignity. And beneath it, a single sheet from the company informing him that his employment was terminated, effective at midnight, along with documentation of the 2 years of hush money he'd taken to cover for Marcus. I nodded toward the stranger by the drinks table. You remember the buyer you lined up for the Western stores, I said. While I was unconscious, he's here. He had some questions about who actually owned what he was buying. Turns out the answer is me. It's always been me. Brett's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Don't worry about your future, I told him. The new will leaves you $1,000. You can use it however you like. Maybe a fresh start. Then I picked up the second envelope. Lauren. She walked over slowly, arms already wrapping around herself, taking the envelope like it might bite. Inside was her own transcript, her careful little question to the doctor about how long these things take. And beneath it, a record of every private document she'd handed Marcus in exchange for the promise of this house. Diane's house. You wanted to know the timeline on my death, I said quietly, before you knew the timeline on my recovery. I heard you, sweetheart. I heard every word. Dad, she whispered, I didn't mean. You meant it, I said. There was no anger in my voice. That's the part I'm almost proud of. I never raised my voice once that whole night. I didn't have to. And the house you were promised, it's going into a trust the day I die. Donated in your mother's name to the hospital that kept me alive. You'll never own a square inch of it. Same as your brother. $1,000 in the will. She sat down right there on the deck step. The Hendersons from next door stared at their shoes. My pastor looked like a man rethinking every decision that had led him to my backyard. And then there was Marcus. I didn't have an envelope for Marcus. I just looked at him, and the whole yard followed my eyes to where he stood, very still now, the easy confidence gone, the blazer suddenly hanging on him like a costume. I told the silent yard the truth. I said that this man wasn't my son by blood, that his own father had abandoned him before he could walk, and that I had married his mother and chosen him, fully and without reservation, when he was 5 years old. I said I'd taught him to drive and walked him through his heartbreaks and handed him the keys to everything I'd built. I said I'd called him my son for 30 years and meant it down to my bones. And then I said that for nearly 4 years he'd stolen from me. $900,000, built on the belief that I would have left him out. You were afraid I'd cut you from the will because you weren't mine, I said. Marcus, you were in the will for an equal third, same as the others. You were never once anything less than my son to me. The only person in this family who ever treated you like an outsider, I let it hang there, was you. Something in his face cracked, not quite remorse. More like the specific devastation of a man who'd bet everything on me staying dead, and lost. I did love you, he said, low, almost to himself. But it never felt like enough. It was real, I told him. That part was always real. That's what makes this the worst day of my life, not yours. I took out my phone. I made one call, and I said 3 words into it. Then I looked toward the side of the house. 2 deputies came through the gate. The whole yard pulled in a single breath. Someone knocked over a glass, and the shatter was the loudest thing in the world. Marcus didn't run. He just looked at me one last time as they read his name, and then they walked him out through the side gate, the same gate he'd walked through 100 times for 100 Sunday dinners. The yard watched in total silence. And here's what I understood, standing under that banner with my whole life in ruins around me and somehow lighter than I'd felt in years. The mistake most people make is believing that loyalty is owed by blood, or earned by money, or guaranteed by years. It isn't. Loyalty is a choice people make over and over in the quiet rooms where they think you can't see them. The hospital was just the room where I finally saw. What I'd understood that nobody else in that yard had figured out was this: the people who decide what you're worth when they think you're not listening, that's who they actually are. Everything else is a performance for the living. So here's what I'd ask you to take from an old man who learned it the hard way. Don't wait for a hospital bed to find out who's in your corner. Pay attention now, while you're healthy and useful, and the masks are still on, to who treats you like a person versus who treats you like an asset. And ask yourself, honestly, if you couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do a single thing for anyone in your life, who would still sit beside you for no reason at all? Those are your people. Hold them close. The rest are just waiting for the will. I picked up my glass. I looked around at the neighbors, the friends, the pastors, the stunned faces. Thank you all for coming, I said, and I meant it. The food's good. I picked the caterer myself. Please eat. Then I buttoned my jacket. As for me, I'm 63 years old. I've got a company that's still standing, a town full of people who actually showed up, and for the first time in a long while, not a single person left in my life who doesn't deserve to be there. I walked through the house, out the front door, into the cold, clear night. My car was already packed. It had been since Thursday. I pulled away from that house for the last time, and I didn't look in the mirror once. So now I want to hear from you, because I've carried this story long enough to need to set it down with someone. Tell me in the comments. Comment 1 if you think I was right to do it the way I did, in front of everyone. Comment 2 if you think I should have handled it quietly, just between family. Or comment 3 if you think, despite everything, I was still too hard on them. I genuinely want to know, because some nights I'm still not sure myself. And tell me where you're listening from, and what time it is there right now. I always like to imagine where in the world this voice is reaching. And if you've ever sat in a room and felt someone you love look right through you like you'd already stopped mattering, tell me about it. You're not alone in that, not even close. If this story moved you, or made you think about the people in your own quiet rooms, do me a favor and subscribe. I tell stories like this one every week. Stories about ordinary people who get pushed all the way to the edge and find out exactly what they're made of. I'd be glad to have you along for the next one. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Harlow Bend to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.